I'd like to reflect on history a bit more. Think about how psychedelics shaped our society, and even some ancient Greeks imagined a democracy with this. There's an interesting book called The Immortality Key by Brian Murarescu, and if you haven't read that book, I think you like that. And you talk a bit about this in your book about the Eleusis rite of passage. So
Mm.
I was really interested in that part. Can you tell me a little bit more about this rite of passage?
Well, I mean, Albert Hoffman tried to figure out what actually is this LSD that he discovered, and he was quite happy when the magic mushrooms were discovered in the 50s, and they had similar effects as psilocybin. And in the old America, before the Spanish came, the mushroom cult was quite normal, or people were using apparently a lot of mushrooms. It was like the medicine. So he thought maybe these drugs, also LSD is not new. Maybe people have always used it. It was like a theory, and as Terence McKenna, he says that actually we Homo sapiens, we had the cognitive revolution, which distinguishes us from monkey apes and other human species that existed. What made us succeed was actually that we in Africa, where we come from, were trying hallucinogenic plants, and that triggered the cognitive advance. These are like, and Hoffman then researched throughout time, like where were um, important mass rituals that defined a society, and the defining ritual of ancient Greece was the ritual of Euleusis, which was held every year in September near Athens. And every year, I think like 5,000 people took part. It was kind of like the Burning Man of the antique days. And people walked from Athens. They fasted for a few days, and they walked from Athens to Eleusis, and it's clear that in like what happened in Eleusis is a secret. No one was allowed to talk about what happened. It was actually the death penalty if you spilled the secret what happened inside the temple of Eleusis. And but what came to light by now was that everyone who had been fasting for a few days, they all had to queue to get into the temple, and while they were queuing, they received the so-called kykeon, which was a drink that was special to this temple, and they drank the drink, and then about 30 minutes later they were in the temple at night, and there were the mysteries of Euleusis were presented to them, and then the people came out in the morning, and their life was transformed, and they had seen God, and they had connected with everyone, and they knew it was like storytelling. It was like myth creation. And Hoffman suspected that this kykeon had a hallucinogenic property, so he teamed up with Wasson, who was the discoverer of the magic mushrooms in Mexico, and Ruck, who still lives actually, who is a Greek historian, ancient historian specializing in ancient Greece. So they went down there and they looked at artifacts, and I mean, it was clear that drugs had been used in ancient Greece, especially opium. Demeter, the goddess of earth, she was the opium goddess. So that's proven basically that opium was important to the Greek culture. But it seems like that kykeon was not opium, but that it was probably already this ergot. So they tried to find proof that this ergot was already growing on the rye back then in Greece in this area, and this book was written, The Road to Euleusis, that tries to prove that the defining ritual of Western civilization, which happened in ancient Greece in Eleusis, was actually a LSD type ritual, which I could very well believe. It sounds credible, and I read the book, and there's a lot of evidence pointing that way, but there's no final proof. No one was that lives now was there. It's no one. It was never written that it was actually ergot. It's pretty clear that there was something in this drink that made people trip during the night, but what it was exactly is unclear. But I mean, it's totally clear to me that drugs have always been used in cultures, by priests and by artists and by rulers and by normal people. And this includes also beer. When beer was founded, and people like to use drugs. People like to intoxicate themselves. Like, who is ever sober? Like, what person is sober like all his life? Like, no one. Everyone's drinking or smoking, or even sugar is a drug. Like, we would like to change our brain. It kind of wants drugs. It wants to change. It wants to have challenges. So it's interesting actually to look at drug use throughout history.